Hello my dears, do you feel like your attention span and ability to focus has gotten increasingly worse over your lifetime? Because I do. Like, in high school I used to read textbooks at record speed and also read books for fun on top of that. In college I managed to, easily pull off doing all of my assignments and also write 8 or 9 videos a month for this channel, and now in order to write a single video I need to hand my phone to my roommate and turn off all my laptop notifications, otherwise I'll never write the video. And maybe I'm a really bad sample size for this because I also write much more heavily research videos now, and I did get brain damage during college, which does completely change how my brain functions. I'm also a lot less disabled now in this moment than I used to be, which is making my focus worse for some reason, but I think based on conversations with my peers and conversations I'm seeing online, this sentiment still more or less stands for the majority of people. We feel very easily distracted all the time, and being easily distracted isn't inherently an issue, but also for the majority of the people this does get in the way of us living the lives we want to live, which is where it does obviously become an issue. Now, according to the internet, which is never a place to start, human attention spans have shortened to that of a goldfish over the past few decades, and it is because of social media, all of which has also been linked to the rise in ADHD diagnoses. Now, we're going to debunk the rest of that throughout this video, but to debunk that first one right out of the gate, the rise in ADHD diagnoses is because a large portion of people are finally getting the care that they needed in the first place, and social media is helping people realize that. But also, it does seem to be making a lot of people think they have ADHD because they're really struggling to focus when they don't have ADHD traits beyond just struggling to focus, and ADHD is so many other things. But you know me, if we're blaming something on something else, I want to know why. I want to see the data, I want to pull apart pop science from the real science, and I want to figure out what actually the heck is scientifically going on. Also, sorry, I forgot this earlier, I'm a white young person with light brown shoulder length curly hair. I'm wearing a green bow in it, and I am wearing a dress with poofy sleeves that is white and has orange flowers on it. I just forgot the word for flower. There's orange flowers on it that have green leaves, and then I'm sitting in front of a plain bowl that has green leaves on it. Don't want to forget that. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is the whole human attention span has dropped to that of a goldfish statistic that we see everywhere. Now, this statistic is often quoted as being from a 2015 paper by the research team at Microsoft Canada that was actually mentioned in their paper and cited from a different source. It wasn't their research. And that different source has literally no locatable research to back up that statement. It's also important to note that goldfish do in fact have long attention spans and also memories, and you can teach them to do tricks and stuff, which of course brings in the question, do disabled mermaids have service fish? And if they do, how would they wear their harnesses? But that's beyond the scope of this video, and I'll let you guys argue that one out in the comments. But this leads us to the actual attention span used in this statistic, which is 9 seconds, a 3-second drop from the average attention span in 2000. But again, that statistic isn't actually based on any verifiable study. There have been other studies trying to measure attention span, but it is a near impossible thing to measure because it doesn't have really an objective operational definition. Many studies measure attention via proxies for attention, so they might measure the amount of time watching the lecturer, or the amount of time taking notes, or the amount of time fidgeting, none of which really indicates how much attention a person is paying to the lecture. There are also multiple forms of attention, which can be divided into anywhere between 3 to 5 categories, depending on which model you choose to work with. There's also a difference between attention and focus, attention being a more broad concept relating to awareness, while focus is the process of controlling that awareness towards something specific. Not to mention that attention is a very task-specific thing. Like, if somebody's really into biology, they're probably gonna have a better attention span in a biology lecture than somebody who's a theater major taking it for a gen ed requirement. And many other factors also affect it. We're gonna talk about those later. But all of this is to say that depending on which researcher you ask, attention spans are either getting shorter or they're staying exactly the same and have been over a very long period of time. Or the researcher will just go, that's not an objectively quantifiable thing, and then don't answer the question, which is about where I stand on this one as well. Now, one measure that people often will use to be like, see, they are getting shorter, is the fact that our media, like our books, our films, our videos online, are getting shorter over time, using this to say that therefore people are only interested in shorter things. But obviously that's a bit of a chicken or the egg question, not to mention that creating shorter things means having time to make more things, which means more profit, which capitalism encourages, if not demands. And the fact that 3-hour-long video essays into hyper niche topics are still super popular implies to me that long form things aren't actually dead. It just depends on the structure of that thing and also the amount of free time that a person may have to watch it. From a general media analyst perspective, as somebody who's watched hundreds of things from all centuries and also reads them as well, we've definitely gotten more concise. I don't think that's necessarily a bad or a good thing. It's just a thing that happens. It seems less like things are getting shorter because people can't pay attention, and more like we have so much we need to do to continue to be people every single day in society that we are all trying to get the most out of our time as possible, which leads to the kind of anxious, I could be doing something else boredom that creeps into everything that we do and experience. And I would also argue that Victor Hugo-length books were necessary for their specific purpose and time, and the necessity of that format no longer fits today's lifestyle. It's not that we're less intelligent and easily distracted now, and that's why we don't want to sit down and read a 600-page academic novel. It's that the circumstances have changed. But we'll get into lifestyle and capitalism a little bit later. The next thing that comes up in this discussion of attention span is dopamine. And I will never escape the dopamine discussion. It'll be around forever, and we will never get rid of it. I made a video a few months ago titled Dopamine Doesn't Work Like That. I'll link it above for you. You should definitely check it out. But basically, people are saying that social media is structured in such a way as to create little dopamine rushes, and then we constantly crave the next one like a drug, and it's destroying our brains, and that's why our attention spans are a mess, because we're addicted to short-term dopamine rushes, and we can't break the cycle, and it's like a drug. Now, the first thing is that you can break the cycle. Brains are very, very plastic. You can always create new routines and new habits. It's a little bit of work, but it's very doable. We're gonna talk about that a little bit later. But the second thing is that dopamine doesn't work like that. I'm not going to get into the major specifics here because we did that in the dopamine video, but the short version is that dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical. It's a chemical that is involved in a whole lot of processes, which does include motivation and anticipation. And it gets released when we're anticipating really exciting things, and also when we're anticipating very stressful things, or when like a PTSD trigger happens or something like that. It's the same chemical. But anyway, social media is set up to be similar to gambling in that things are unpredictable and you're constantly anticipating the next big thing, so you don't want to stop participating in it because, oh, it could happen right now. And this does involve dopamine because the more that you're anticipating something, the more dopamine is being released, but it's not that we're craving it like a drug or whatever, it's that we're anticipating the reward that never quite comes, which makes us want to try harder for the reward. And chemicals are involved because chemicals are involved in everything, that's how brains work, but that does not mean that it is causing the situation, because outside stuff affects the brain chemicals and inside brain chemicals affect the outside things. It's not one or the other, it never really is. And our dopamine receptors aren't being blown out or whatever by social media, because that's not how that works. That doesn't mean that social media isn't operationally conditioning our brains to respond in certain ways to certain things, but blaming internal chemical processes, things that we have effectively no control over, is both inaccurate and unhelpful. I also don't think that social media is the root of all evil either, and we'll get into that discussion as well. The thing with social media is that it gets profit via how much we use it. So they're doing everything that they possibly can to make sure you do not click off that app, which means that they are throwing so much information at you at all times, hoping that one of those things will maybe grab your attention and hold your attention for a period of time. And this is super effective, but it also means that we're being inundated with so much information at once that we cannot properly filter any of it in or out, which over time causes cognitive fatigue. And that's why after a full day of scrolling, you're really exhausted and you're not sure why, because you're like, I just sat on the couch all day, but your brain feels really tired. It's because there's too much coming at you at once to be physically possible to process all of it, and your brain just overloads and shorts out. At the same time, the information that we are getting also typically has little to no depth or substance, which is fine. Like, I'm a big puppy video watcher, and for the record, there is actual scientific evidence that cat videos are good for your mental health. But it does mean that what we're scrolling through doesn't require a whole lot of focus or brain work to pay attention to, which makes the million distractions that are all going on at the same time a lot easier to switch to, because you're not actually hooked into each individual thing entirely. And it makes us very used to constantly bouncing from thing to thing and trying to constantly multitask. Think of it this way. You know how when you're listening to a playlist on shuffle, like one that's like a really weird playlist where you just put a lot of songs in it, it's not really curated, and sometimes it'll play an absolute bop and you're dancing, you're having the best day of your entire life. And then the next song comes on and it's really slow and it's really sad, and then you feel kind of itchy because it's like, it's such a change in energy level, and so you need to find a song that's more in between bop and slow before you can listen to the slow song, because they feel boring and weird otherwise. It doesn't mean that you're incapable of ever listening to slow songs. It's just that you're used to fast songs. So your brain is looking for that sensory input in the next thing, and it's having a hard time adjusting to that change, and so you try to fix it by either going back to the bop or trying to find a new song. Social media kind of works the same way. There's information overload all the time, and so when you close Instagram and you put down your phone, your brain is like, hold up. everything is so slow right now. What's going on? I need to do something similar to sort this out because it's too overwhelming. And so then you go on TikTok instead, and then you go back and forth for the rest of the day. The other half of what I'm going to call cognitive coasting is that not only are we consuming a lot of surface level information that we are therefore not focusing on, which means that we're not really storing any of it properly, is that our feeds are also super centered around us and our individual experiences, to the things that we like and the things that we're interested in. And so we get somewhat used to everything being not just catered to our interests with the ability to easily scroll away from things that aren't interesting to us, but also simplified and easy to understand, all of which means that when we come across things in life that are complicated or don't entirely interest us, the motivation to engage in them more thoroughly isn't immediately there because we're not used to using that muscle. And then we get impatient when things take time to understand or figure out because we're used to easy answers. Or when something happens, we see something, we go to a show, I don't know, and we're not in the target audience for it, and then we're like, oh, it was bad because it wasn't for us, when it could be perfect for another target audience. That's the thing that I'm seeing a lot of in the theater world right now. This situation also hurts the critical thinking media literacy muscle because everything is so simple that we feel like we don't have to think when consuming it, and so therefore we don't think when we consume it. There's also the aspect of autoplay that makes it so that you don't have to choose what information you're getting or actively like, this video is done, time to pick a new one. It'll just add a new one for you, and so you're less likely to actively get up and leave the app at the end of one video because the next thing is already started. All of which can cause some problems. The first and most obvious one is that all media serves some purpose and has some goal. Even if that goal is just to be silly or just to be cute, that is still a meaning or a motivation. But also, a lot of other media is trying to sell you something literal or trying to sell you some ideal. We've talked about media literacy before on this channel, you can watch that up here. But if we're consuming all of this information completely passively without thinking about it, because we go on social media for brainless, no brain time, I mean, I go on it for work, but that's different. That's a rare situation. We're less likely to realize that target audiences are a thing, or the goal of a narrative, or we may just filter things in and forget about them, which then will create prejudices and points of view that we're unaware may be from a biased source. The most basic example that I can give you is that since humans are trained not to stare at disabled people or acknowledge that they are disabled, we see disabled characters in the vast majority of media we consume, and then we literally forget they're disabled and just see the character, but we end up seeing the trope related to that character and then filtering out the disability, but we keep the disability in our brains, we just don't realize it. And so when we see somebody like that in public, we treat them as if we would treat that character. Like, for example, so many villains have facial differences, and we forget that they all have facial differences, but then when we meet somebody with a facial difference in real life, we might be, I don't know, not trusting of them. And we might feel like that gut instinct is correct because, oh, we know things about the world, but actually that has very ableist origins, and that's where that came from, but you don't realize it because you weren't paying attention to it. Getting used to the norms of social media also means that we have a harder time adjusting to things, taking more time to understand. We're more likely to get frustrated or distracted or give up on these things. We know that increased social media time makes us less detail oriented and therefore more likely to make mistakes. There's a lot of studies that relate social media usage with decreased productivity and performance quality in students. It also messes with social skills because internet social norms are completely different from in-person social norms. And since we all got thrown online during the pandemic, we all got a lot more used to internet social norms. And then we did in-person stuff and we were like, I don't remember how this works, and we all had a really rough time readjusting back to that. The other major thing that I mentioned earlier is that it conditions us to feel like we need all of the stimulation all the time, and so we become somewhat convinced that we are able to constantly multitask, and I will be the first to tell you, I am a major multitasker, and it is a problem. I always have been, and it has never once improved my performance. And I know, not just from actual scientific data, but because I do science experiments on myself regularly. And I'm way more productive when I'm focusing on single individual tasks, and yet I continuously multitask almost all the time anyway. Now, the way that multitasking works, or doesn't, rather, is that you're not fully in either task, which means you're doing the tasks on a more surface level and will therefore not engage with it as critically or remember it in the long term. This is why if you're the kind of person who always did like other assignments in class, you don't remember any of the class content, you're also neurologically not focusing on two tasks at the same time. You are constantly switching between both tasks, which means that you are adding the time it takes for your brain to reorient between each switch to the time that it would take to do both tasks individually. So it's both taking longer than it would have individually, and also you're doing a worse job at both. And the more your brain gets used to content switching, like how apps are set up to keep you interested, the more that you seek that out just due to habit, which means that your work over long term is going to get consistently worse. Now, the interesting thing is that this is actually different for ADHDers, though ADHD is related to executive functioning, and executive functioning is what controls that cognitive flexibility, so it actually does make sense, but you know what I mean. In studies of multitasking with ADHDers, we do not show a worse performance at the things that we do. However, we do report much higher levels of stress, exhaustion, anxiety, and depression if we multitask. Now, from my experience as a professional multitasker, there's 3 different ways the multitasking works, or doesn't work. There's 3 different versions of multitasking, and the second 2 don't work and the first one does. First, there's the sensory multitasking, where I'm fidgeting with something, or I'm listening to music, or I'm painting, or I'm doing something to keep my sensory input busy so that I can focus on another task. I don't majorly consider this multitasking because it feels more like I'm just jamming my sensory seeking system so it doesn't try to derail me from focusing on the main thing. The second thing are the things that I think I can do both at once, and it definitely takes a lot longer, which is when I'll work on captioning videos while watching TV or something. It always takes me 30 to 50% longer. I've calculated that, but also captioning sucks. So I usually do that anyway unless I'm really in crunch time, because I would rather spend slightly more time being slightly miserable than less time being really miserable. But that's also a thing that I'm working on, because actually less time being miserable is ideal. So, you know, this category for me also includes listening to podcasts while cooking, because I always miss small portions of what I'm listening to while I'm focusing on cooking and on not touching things directly out of the oven, because I do it every single time. Or when I write 2 separate semi-related videos at once, because they do feed into each other, but they are separate ideas. It always takes me some time to work my way back between all the concepts, and it's not actually saving me any time. The third category of multitasking is the one I don't do anymore. And this is straight up doing other assignments while I'm in class, where while using my time very effectively, and I turned to that option solely because my options were focus on my education or take care of my disabilities, and I chose to not die as my option. I wrote some really sketchy papers and I missed a whole lot of what was happening in lectures, but I told myself that I was capable of doing both things, and that was incorrect. So do not be like former Sydney and don't do that. Now, after reading all this research and making this video, I will genuinely be working on how I do basic tasks without background noise or without doing multiple things at once, because it really does stress me out and make me more easily overwhelmed. And I just kind of ignored that because I was like, I'm making things better. I'm getting more things done, but I was actually just miserable. So lesson learned on that one. But this starts to get into the point that I realized while researching this. A lot of the articles discussing attentional differences over time have come to the conclusion that social media is making us as people lazier. And lazy is one of those words that sets off a little alarm bell in my brain, because much of what we call lazy is just things that make life easier or things that people do that aren't conventionally productive. I'm not going to use the word unproductive here, because doing nothing or playing a video game or doing a puzzle or reading a book can be very productive for mental and physical and socio-emotional health. It's just not productive in the way we categorize productivity to be under capitalism, because you're not like creating product. But like, are we lazy because of social media, or are we just super exhausted and stressed and therefore turning to the lowest effort form of entertainment to pass the time and distract us? Like, you can argue that social media is giving us information overload, which is the case, but also we are all as people constantly multitasking and on edge off of social media, because we live in a world where a boss could call or email us at any time, where we feel like we need to make it look like we're always using our time wisely 24/7. We have the 24-hour news cycle. There's always so much to catch up on in every single moment. There's always a tragedy going on that we need to process. And our friends or family could also call us at any time and need something. So we can't feasibly unplug. And also, so many people are doing 2 jobs plus a side hustle just to try to get by. So at the end of all of that, you're gonna want to sit on the couch and scroll on TikTok rather than do something more complicated. You're exhausted. This makes complete sense to me. For a different way to look at this, the whole death of literature discussion that we're seeing a lot lately, because people tend to read like romance and fluffier books instead of like nonfiction works or more cerebral literary stuff. And everybody's like, everybody's too lazy and stupid these days to read good literature. I'm the target audience for cerebral stuff. If you've been around this channel long enough, you know that. But for every single video I make, which were every week and are now not going to be as much every week, I read an entire book and usually about 20 to 30 research articles for every single video. The only books that I have read this year that were not for work have been romance novels or books for middle schoolers. And it's not that I'm less intelligent or less focused or that I don't have all of the cerebral stuff on my shelf that I never look at. It's just that my brain only has so much capacity, and that's how I want to use my capacity and my time off. I want to read things that don't use my brain cell, because my brain cell is tired of being used. We know from research that the more exhausted people are, the more sleep debt that they're in, the more likely they are to want to engage in brainless tasks. We know that increased social media usage is correlated with lower test scores in students, but also That's an indirect correlation. The direct correlation is between social media use and mental health issues. Our focus issues are not because of our social media use. Social media use is the symptom of the wider problem, which is that we are inundated with so much information from every direction all of the time. Have you ever tried to get work done while anxiously waiting for a test result or a phone call? You can't get your brain to focus or settle, and you just feel really jumpy all the time, and you're like hallucinating that your phone buzzed. Like, those kinds of things happen. And on some level, maybe not to that degree, but that is what we are feeling constantly. And I would argue that yes, we're in a mental health crisis right now, absolutely. But it's not because of social media or because every individual is struggling with things that they individually need to work through. It's because the world, as it currently exists, is overwhelming and stressful and exhausting and difficult to navigate and overall unsustainable, which is then leading to an increased portion of the population feeling disabled by perfectly reasonable responses to their surroundings. Because we don't have societal mechanisms in place to relax and take care of yourself unless it's a diagnosable issue or you have enough income to be able to take time off. That being said, leaving this video on a wow everything sucks and this problem is too big for us to be able to individually fix or manage note is not very helpful. The point at the end of this is that we turn to hyperstimulating stuff to fill a void. And then while it does make us feel good in the very short term, it makes us feel a whole lot worse in the very long term. So how can we then fill that void in a different and safer, better for us way? And I'm not saying cut out social media from your life altogether. That's unrealistic. Also, I clearly benefit off of it. It's my job. But it is unrealistic to just be like, nope, no social media ever. And also, generally cutting things out does lead to binging them more down the line and overusing them, so it's better to learn moderation and understand how a thing may impact you and handle it that way instead. And yes, on principle, the burden of all of this work should be on society. It is not our fault that things are like this, so it shouldn't be our responsibility to figure out how to handle it, but also, I'm a realist, and this is what reality looks like right now. Now, the best way to approach working on attentional skills is, like we talked about earlier with the mismatched playlist. You're not going to be able to go directly from the boppiest of bops to the slowest song in the entire world because you are going to feel really itchy and jumpy when you do that. You're building a muscle, it's going to take time, and it should be gradual, which means taking breaks between things and slowly working your way from one sensory input to a different sensory input, which I didn't realize I do until I saw the answer in progress video about fixing attention spans, and Sabrina went straight from distracted all the time to the most focused human ever in the world, and she was on edge and miserable and overwhelmed. And I was like, I look like that. I look like that all the time. I don't want to do that anymore. But for an example, I have a playlist that is full of really calming like video game and film soundtracks. It's like 10 hours long. I made it with a couple of friends. And when I sit down to write videos, I put my headphones on and I listen to that playlist. The more focused on my writing I get, the more I turn down that volume until eventually I'm in a focus flow state and I turn off the music entirely because I write faster in silence. But if I just sat down in silence to start writing, I would never be able to start focusing on it because I have too many internal and external distractions going on. So if I minimize all of those, I can then start focusing and then I can get rid of that last distraction that I put in place. This is also why I usually keep sticky notes near me to write out whatever unrelated thing my brain may want to remember so I don't focus too hard on that task and stop doing the thing that I mean to be doing. There's also other ways to eliminate distractions. Like I have an app on my Mac called Cold Turkey. It's great, it's free, and I turn on for a period of time of my choosing, and then it blocks all social media and otherwise distracting sites that I set in there for that period of time, and I cannot open them until the time is up. And it doesn't have a countdown clock, so if it turns off and you're focused on something, you won't even notice and you'll just keep working through it. You also cannot uninstall Cold Turkey while it is active. So there is literally no way to work yourself out of the blocks, and it's fantastic. It has saved my life so many times. I also have parental controls on my phone because I will scroll for long periods of time and not realize time is passing, but it will alert me after 30 minutes, and that's enough of like a, oh yeah, I did spend time to break me out of my task inertia, and then I'll go and do something else. There's also days where I know that I'm waiting for like an important DM or something, and so I won't let myself use the app all day so that it'll notify me when those things happen, and then I never get to my time limit. And on those days, I usually feel better because I'm not waking up and scrolling for an hour and then moving on with my day. I just get up, put my phone on the counter, and get on with what I need to be doing. There is also research that having your phone visible makes it still a distraction, even if it's upside down or turned off. So my roommate and I will sometimes hand our phones to each other and then walk away. I also often will just leave mine in my room and then go to the living room to work instead. Creating clear blocks of time to work on something can also be helpful, and also organizing that based on energy. So like I do both theater and research work during the day, and sometimes theater research work, depends on the day. But I will wake up and do like my research stuff and then take a break and then do the theater things and then take a break and then do my research things, rather than having two different research things in a row so that each thing acts as a slight energy break from the other thing because they use a completely different skill set. This also includes not multitasking. Stop it. Don't do it. This is a message for Sydney. No. you'll be both faster and happier getting things done if you do one task at a time. I also find that reframing things, instead of just being like, how dare I spend 3 hours scrolling on TikTok? What's wrong with you? You're a lazy bum. I will instead be like, this is harmful to me because it makes my head hurt a lot and I don't want to harm myself and I take care of myself. So I'm going to do this behavior instead in the future, and this is how I'm going to stop me from doing this thing that is harmful for me, and focus more on like, I was drawn to this thing because of this reason, but it wasn't great for me, and so I'm going to replace it with this thing that will be healthier, rather than just being mad at myself because that's not productive. Specifically when it comes to like sensory seeking or otherwise seeking more entertainment things, because boredom in general is simply, I don't feel satisfied, something is missing, something needs to change here. But also fixing that with short-term gratification that doesn't actually make you feel satisfied makes the underlying issue worse and things start to feel emptier and more sad. So it's better to try to find like larger and more long-term goals and working towards things and feeling like there is a large goal at the end of it, which does mean trying harder things. It means trying things that you don't get immediately and working through that, which is where we relearn patience and creativity and problem solving and critical thinking and all of these really important skills. And communication skills. Also communication skills. Those are important. It's also important to remember to sleep and take breaks, because that's how our brains process information and put it into our memories to use for later. Doing a million things at once back to back makes it all a blur, which doesn't help in the long run. I will also say I did a science experiment the other day. I just am my own test subject, it's fine. Where I one night went to bed really early and the next night I stayed up really late and I wanted to see what would happen. And the night that I stayed up, like it was just 2 hours later than I normally do, like it wasn't the worst. I felt terrible the next day. Specifically, my mental health was so much worse. I was like, I couldn't focus, I was depressed, it was just a bad time. And I was like, what's wrong? And I realized it was my sleep. And that has completely changed my schedule for the rest of my life, pretty much. I learned that lesson very quickly. So sleep, really important. Keep with the sleeping. I feel like I'm just yelling at myself in this video at this point, but hopefully this is helpful for you also. And I know all of this is obviously easier said than done. I think we all say like, oh, I want to slow down, or I want a better work-life balance. But then we live in a world that makes doing that near impossible. But then if you get 1% better at giving yourself a little bit time off every day, you're 365% better at the end of the year. And the biggest thing that has been a game changer for me around attention for me has been what attention is, which is paying attention. Pay attention to the media that you're consuming, and what it's trying to say, or how that makes you feel, or what your body mind is trying to tell you. It doesn't mean that I always listen to what my body mind is trying to tell me, but I at least figure out what it's saying and how to take that into consideration when figuring out what to do next, and how to figure out what my to-do list needs, what my body needs, and how I can find an in-between. Because that then helps me figure out, like, is that media actually teaching me things that are helpful, or is it trying to sell me harmful ideas, or is it just making me stressed and miserable? This also helps me figure out how to economize my energy when I'm doing tasks, or how to build breaks into things, or how to trick my brain into doing what I need it to do, just simply by reflecting on what's happening and how I'm feeling and where I'm at in any given moment, which is difficult and takes a lot of practice. I know researching for this video in particular, I kept learning things and going, that's what I do? That's why I feel that way. Oh, that makes so much sense. And it has completely shifted how I've been going about doing things as a person, because I'd figured out how to hack my focusing, but I was also miserable and I didn't know why. And it's because I wasn't taking breaks or replacing one thing with another thing. I was just cutting things out and trying to pretend they didn't exist, and also multitasking a lot, which I'm not going to do anymore. But anyway, I hope this is helpful, or you at least learned something. I certainly did. At the end of the day, capitalism, once again the problem, and we're again blaming the deeply and concerningly unregulated social media platforms and brain chemicals and individuals for that fact, when it is not any of our faults, which seems to usually be the conclusion that we come to at the end of it all. Though I do think that we should be creating more guidelines and laws and regulations about social media, because, yeah, but not the TikTok ban though. We're not going to do that. Anyway, speaking of taking breaks, I'm taking next week off, but I hope you have a great rest of your Pride Month, and as always, thank you for listening, thank you for learning. Remember, it is never too late to start over, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.